Welcome to episode 3 of Project 613. Today we continue the Rambam's 14 principles on how to define a mitzvah. Principle number 4. The Rambam does not include all-encompassing directives. For example, God says, "And keep my covenant," or "Concerning all that I have said to you, you shall beware." Verses that don't instruct us regarding a specific action, but regarding the imperative to observe all the Torah's commandments, are not included in the 613. Principle number 5. The reason for a mitzvah is also not counted on its own. Sometimes the Torah tells us the reason for a command in language that could be understood as an independent precept, when in fact, it's simply the rationale behind the words that precede it. For example, in Leviticus, the verse says, "He shall not leave the sanctuary, and he shall not desecrate the holy things of his God." Not desecrating the holy is not a commandment on its own. It's a reason why the Kohen, the priest, may not leave the sanctuary. Principle number 6. A mitzvah that has both negative and positive components is counted as two. One positive commandment and one negative commandment. For example, we are commanded to rest on the Shabbat, and we're also commanded to not to work on the Shabbat. We're commanded to afflict ourselves on Yom Kippur, and we're also commanded not to eat on this holy day. Though a transgression of one is also a transgression of the other, if you eat on Yom Kippur, you have not afflicted yourself. If you work on Shabbat, you have not rested. Nevertheless, these are considered two independent mitzvah. Principle number 7. The different applications of a mitzvah are also not individually counted. So, if, for example, the verse says one who inadvertently defiles the temple or holy foods is required to bring a sin offering. Now, if his financial situation allows, he's to bring a sheep or a she-goat. Otherwise, he brings 2 birds, and if he's completely impoverished, he brings a flour offering. All this, however, is counted as one mitzvah, the mitzvah of bringing a sin offering when this particular offense is committed, even though the execution of the mitzvah varies depending on the situation. Principle number 8. Do not count a negative statement amongst the prohibitions. The Hebrew word lo can mean both do not and also shall not, and only the do nots are counted as prohibitions. The only way to discern between the two is by studying the context of the word. For example, in Exodus it says, "She shall not go free as the slaves go free." This verse should not be construed as a prohibition. It's simply telling us that the circumstances that mandate the emancipation of a Canaanite slave do not apply to a Hebrew maidservant. Certainly, however, if the owner wishes to free her, he may do so. Another example is, "So he shall not be like Korach and his company." This is not a prohibition. It's a warning that anyone who dares contest the priesthood of Aaron's descendants will meet the same fate as Korach and his gang. Principle number 9. Do not count the number of times a commandment is mentioned in the Torah, only the act which is prohibited or commanded. There are certain mitzvot which are repeated in the Torah numerous times. For example, the commandment to rest on Shabbat is mentioned 12 times. Another example is the prohibition against consuming blood, which is repeated no less than 7 times. Nevertheless, when counting the 613 mitzvot, we only count a prohibited or prescribed act once. It should be noted that though we count the prohibited acts and not the amount of times mentioned, we only count prohibited acts individually specified in the Torah. At times, the Torah will issue a prohibition employing general terminology. For this prohibition includes multiple acts. For example, you shall not eat over the blood. This prohibition teaches us not to eat sacrificial flesh before the blood is sprinkled on the altar. Not to eat from any animal before its soul, contained in its blood, has fully departed, that the members of a court may not eat on the day that they implement a capital verdict, and more. Though all of these are biblically forbidden, none of them are counted as part of the 613, as none of them are mentioned specifically in the Torah.